In this explainer, we're diving into a pretty fascinating white paper that pinpoints this mysterious brain glitch. It's a feeling you might have had before, but I'm betting it's a name you've probably never heard. So let's get right into it. You ever done this? You stare at a really simple word, like door, until it just loses all meaning and looks like a bunch of random shapes? Or maybe you've walked into a room you know like the back of your hand, and for just a split second, it feels completely alien? Well, that exact feeling, that little break from reality, is what we're talking about today. And there's a name for it, jamais vu. It's French for never seen. It's basically the weird, unsettling opposite of its more famous cousin, déjà vu. You know, where déjà vu is that feeling that something new feels weirdly familiar. Jamais vu is when something deeply familiar suddenly feels totally, bizarrely new. And as we're about to see, it's way more than just a quirky little feeling. It can actually signal a much, much deeper conflict going on. To really understand what this feels like, we've got to go beyond just the definition. The white paper we're looking at really zeroes in on the story of one person, a man named Denis Verhage. So Denis found himself in this state of just intense confusion. Tasks he knew how to do, things that should have been totally automatic, suddenly felt impossible. He described it as constantly dropping the balls, a complete breakdown in his ability to just do his job, leading to what felt to him like total personal and professional failure. And look, this wasn't just him being a little forgetful. Denis's experience was this profound alienation from his own mind. It was like his internal world was glitching out. The wire that connects thinking to doing just felt severed. And for Denis, who also has dyslexia, this feeling was amplified, creating this perfect storm of cognitive chaos. So, this brings us to the absolute core question that this research is trying to answer. Was Denis just not able to cope? Was this some kind of personal shortcoming? Or was there some invisible force at play here? Something external that was causing his internal world to just fall apart? Now, to find the answer, the white paper takes us somewhere you might not expect. We're going to look at the brain's own error correction system. And ironically, the best way to understand jamais vu, this feeling of never seen, is to first really get a handle on its opposite, déjà vu. We usually think of déjà vu as some kind of spooky glitch in the Matrix, right? But neuroscientists see it completely differently. It's actually a sign of a healthy brain doing its job. It's your brain's fact-checking system kicking into gear. See, a memory region in your brain mistakenly sends out a, "Hey, I've seen this before" signal. Then your frontal cortex jumps in like a super diligent editor and goes, "Whoa, hang on a sec, let me double check that." That tiny moment of conflict is what you experience as déjà vu. So the process is pretty straightforward. First, your senses pick something up. Second, a part of your brain mistakenly flags it as familiar. But the third and most crucial step is your frontal cortex going, "Nope, false alarm," and correcting the error. It's a healthy, super quick mismatch. And this just perfectly highlights the difference. Déjà vu is the system working correctly, catching a tiny error. Thumbs up. But what the research argues is that Denis's jamais vu experience, that's something else entirely. It's not a healthy check. It's a sign of the whole system being under so much stress that it's actually breaking down. The familiar doesn't just feel new, it feels wrong. Okay, so what in the world could cause a disruption that big? Well, the white paper introduces this really powerful concept to explain it, and it's called a systemic juggernaut. These are the invisible but overwhelming forces in our world that can literally cause our brains to glitch. And these juggernauts aren't some abstract concept. They're all around us, born from what the research calls the majority principle. Systems built for the so-called average person. Think about rigid 9-to-5 workdays, or communication styles that only work for some people, or one-size-fits-all education. For someone who is neurodivergent, like Denis, the paper argues these aren't just annoying, they're a relentless, crushing pressure. So a systemic juggernaut is basically this massive external system that is just fundamentally at odds with a person's own internal biology. It's like an unstoppable force meeting a person's unique way of thinking. And the result isn't that the person adapts, it's that they break. So how does this all come together to solve the puzzle of what happened to Denis? Well, this is the moment where his personal story and all this neuroscience finally connect. This quote from the source material is the absolute heart of the entire argument.
Dennis wasn't dropping the balls because he was incapable or lazy. His brain's capacity was being forcibly reset over and over again by the constant, overwhelming pressure of these systems. Let me say that again. It was systemic overload, not personal failure. And this table here, it lays out the whole chain reaction perfectly. On one side, you've got the external forces, the juggernauts, like neglect from an employer. These then create a very real internal impact on the brain, causing things like neural desynchronization and problems in specific brain regions critical for memory. And the final, observable result? These jamais vu states, that intense disorientation, and yeah, the dropping of the balls. So the most important thing to take away from this, the most powerful idea in this research, is how it reframes Dennis's whole experience. What looked like failure from the outside was actually a completely logical, biological response to an impossible situation. His brain wasn't failing. It was reacting exactly as it should to an environment that was fundamentally toxic to its wiring. And what's great is that the white paper doesn't just diagnose the problem and leave it there. It actually points toward a path forward. It talks about frameworks like something called prismatic cognition, which aims to help restore that internal brain synchrony, while also fighting to change the external systems, tackling the injustice at its root. And that leaves us with a final, really powerful question to think about. Dennis's story shows us just how deeply our internal worlds can be shaken by the outside world. So it forces us to ask, what invisible juggernauts might be at play in our own lives, shaping our performance, our stress levels, and maybe even our very perception of reality?